Hey friends, Tony Bacigalupo with Gathering Summit here, and our next guest is Saron Yitbarek of CodeNewbie. It's an online community for people who are new to code. And anybody who's learned how to code knows it can be a really scary thing. So what Saron has done has made it just a lot less scary. It started with a Twitter chat. Now they produce a in-person conference. And Saron just has some amazing ideas, some amazing tips, and some great podcasting tips as well. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Saron Yitbarek of CodeNewbie. Saron, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me. I'm really excited to have a chance to chat with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So first of all, give me a little bit of background on you, your story, how you ended up starting CodeNewbie. Where'd your motivation come from for that?
Sure. So my motivation came from my own experience learning to code. So I decided I wanted to learn to code. I spent a couple months on my own trying to figure it out. Lots of just really frustrating nights in my apartment, fighting with the computer. And then after a few months of that, I decided to enroll in a boot camp. So I went to the Flatiron School in New York City, and I did a few months there. And for me, the biggest benefit of going to a boot camp was really the community. It was having the 44 other people there who knew the ups and downs, who could really appreciate that journey. But I felt like the only way to really get that community, especially back then, was really through a boot camp. It was really hard to do that on your own. And I didn't like the fact that you had to essentially quit your job and spend thousands of dollars on a program in order to get the other people that were really valuable. And so with that, I started the CodeNewbie Twitter chat. So we've been doing for over 4 years now. And CodeNewbie kind of grew from there.
Okay, so you found a sense of belonging and community in Flatiron School. So that's cool that they were able to achieve that for you. But a boot camp is a big undertaking.
Yeah.
And not everybody can afford that. Not everybody can afford the time dedication.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were wanting to make that more accessible to others, and I guess also for yourself. Once you get out of that boot camp, now what?
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Yeah, absolutely.
And then how did you start? So what was the first thing you did to get CodeNewbie started, and how did that ball kind of start rolling?
Sure. So we started by doing the Twitter chat. So back then, everyone was doing a Twitter chat. It was a pretty popular format. And so we used the hashtag. We picked a time and a day. For us, it was 9 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Pacific on Wednesdays. The hashtag, I have the email where I have a bunch of different options for hashtags, and one of them was CodeNewbie. And so to get that going, I think I DM'd everyone I knew who had a bigger following than me and said, hey, could you please retweet this? And can you please spread the word? And I think I did that every week for, I want to say, a couple months, just kind of begging people to go, hey, can you spread the word? Can you spread the word? And eventually it got to a point, maybe about 4 months in, where I said, okay, I think we have a thing here. We're starting to see a lot of the same faces. We're starting to kind of build that community, and it was able to kind of stand on its own.
I love what you're saying about this, because literally right now I'm working on promoting Gathering Summit, and I know there's so many people who would love to participate who just don't know that it exists, and thinking about the best ways to approach it. And you have to get over a little bit of shyness about asking for people to help you out and get the word out.
And I think at that point it was really helpful, because for me it wasn't a business, it wasn't my life, it was just this cool idea I had. So there was a lot less pressure. I didn't feel like it had to work. I felt like, oh, it'd be really cool. So it made the ask feel like not that big of an ask. If they said no, it was going to be fine. Maybe we'd get less people, but it wasn't this huge, and it didn't feel like a huge endeavor that I was taking on, So that really helped as well. The mindset of that was really helpful.
Do you find that that's because now you do run a business and you have these other kind of things going, that it shifts for you when you do have a business that you're asking for people's help on?
Yeah, I think so. I think it shifts not so much in how people respond, because they get that at the end of the day, even if we're a business, we're still about the community, and that's what we're here for. I think it shifts more for me on my end, because the stakes feel, higher. Things are more serious. Nowadays, if I can't get something to work, then it's like I don't eat. You know what I mean? It directly affects me in a way that it didn't back when it was just a Twitter chat. So I think it's changed the seriousness that I feel about it, but I don't think it's changed the way people respond to it.
So, okay, this is, I think, really important for a lot of community builders, because I've experienced this too, where when I was just doing something as a community effort, it felt very pure and natural and authentic for me. And then once it became a business where my livelihood depended on it, asking people for help became less comfortable for me to do. Mm-hmm. And I started getting a little bit tighter about am I being legit, or am I trying
Mhm.
to, make
Yeah.
improper use of my connections and things like that. So how do you work with that? How do you kind of stay true and kind of keep things going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I've been incredibly surprised and humbled by how willing people are to give up, frankly, a lot of time and and effort in helping me do whatever it is, whether it's reviewing CFPs or being a mentor or just giving me feedback on things. I've been really pleased to see that. But I also, like you, I feel weird about asking people for help. And I've learned kind of through trial and error what is acceptable. There are things that I've asked people to do that I think are a big deal, and to them, it is not a big deal. To them, it is really easy and really fun for them. And so in general, I try to keep my asks to be very, very contained. So to give you an example, we're doing CodeLand right now where we have CFPs open, and I have a programming committee. And the programming committee, their job is to review all the submissions. Now, if I were to pay each person to submit or to review, I literally could not afford that. Like that's just that's out of budget, right? I can't pay 20 people for, their hourly rate to review submissions. So for me, it helps to know that that's just totally outside my price range, and I can't pay them even if I wanted to. Even if they would frankly take the money, I can't. But the other side of it is, for them, spending 10 hours reviewing proposals is not a big ask. In fact, they look forward to it. They feel honored to be on the programming committee. It's a badge of honor. One person said, "Can I put it on my LinkedIn? Can I put it on my resume?" And I'm like, "Sure." So kind of realizing that if I ask people for small kind of contained things that have a start, that have a clear endpoint, I find that it's a lot easier to have that conversation without me feeling guilty and without them feeling like I'm taking advantage of them. And realizing that there are things that for me, it's a job, for them, it's fun, and appreciating that difference.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think it's a natural assumption you can make that, well, other people are busy like I'm busy, or this particular thing is a big ask because it would be big for me. But the whole reason that we ask for help is because we want to find people for whom it's a lot easier for them to do than for us.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Super important and super handy, and I think especially as you're scaling up, it becomes essential.
Yep.
Because now what you're running is an operation that does a lot more than just a Twitter chat. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the operation's like now and what it was like to grow it to what it is now?
Yeah, sure. So we do a few things. So I think it was almost a year into doing the Twitter chats, I realized that the Twitter chats are a great way to have lots of conversations at one time, but it's not a great way to dive deeper into one. You can't really kind of focus and explore a topic or a person, in that format. And because I used to work at NPR, I thought, oh, podcasting is a much better tool, much better way to do that. And so that's where the podcast came from. So we do the CodeNewbie podcast. We published over 200 episodes at this point, and that's just been a great way to just focus on one technical topic or one person and really dive deep and dig into the nuances of their journey, of their story. And then after that, I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of conferences myself, and I've taken notes on what works and what doesn't work. And so I really wanted to create a conference specifically for new developers. And so that launched CodeLand, and this year will be our third year that we do CodeLand. And that's all about creating the ultimate conference experience for folks who may not normally go to conferences, for folks who, this is their first tech conference they've ever been to, and people who are just getting started in their coding journey. And the last big thing that we do is our Base CS podcast. So there's a wonderful woman named Vaidehi Joshi who does not have a CS degree but wanted to have that education. And so she spent a year learning computer science and writing a blog post about what she learned every week. And I saw that and I thought, this would be a really good podcast. So we turned it into a podcast. I'm the student, she's the teacher, and she's teaching me computer science topics in little 20-minute episodes. So that's the other big show that we do.
Wow, amazing. And just super brash, how much is this your living, your livelihood? Is this
like 95%?
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Does that mostly come from the conference, the speaking, or?
It's not the speaking. So the speaking is the other 5%. So the speaking is like not really much. But most of it comes from sponsorships through the podcast and through the conference.
Wow, great. And you said something about the ultimate conference for people who don't normally go to conferences and for people who are new to coding. So yeah. What does that look like? What is the ultimate? What are the elements of an ultimate conference, or what's your vision for that?
Oh, I love talking about this. So the way I thought about it was, what is the user story of a conference attendee, right? When you do user stories, you think about, you think about that flow, you start from, maybe signing in to pressing a button all the way to checkout, whatever that process is. So I thought, if I'm a new developer and I'm walking into the building for the first time, what's the first thing that I see? Okay, now I need to go get my badge. What does registration look like? Okay, now I'm picking up my badge. That badge isn't, and I learned this after the first year, that badge isn't just about a name tag. It's going to be some type of memorabilia for that conference, right? I'm going to take that home, and that's going to be my little keepsake. So what does that experience look like? Okay, now you have to find the conference room. Is there going to be breakfast? How do I find breakfast? So you kind of design this flow for the conference attendee, and you realize, especially if you know this community very well, that there are certain points of friction. So number one is just in terms of signage, you never want people to feel lost. You never want people to feel like, oh, I don't know where I'm going. You never want them to feel overwhelmed. And once they sit down and they're at the conference, you want to make sure that they see a reflection of themselves. For that, that means a bunch of different things. It means, diversity and inclusion is a big part of it, but also it's life experience. It's knowing that, if I'm in that audience, I probably don't have a CS degree. So making sure our speakers also have a range of different backgrounds, different academic backgrounds. It's knowing that for a lot of folks who don't quite have a job yet, they're not thinking so much in the weeds about the technology. They're thinking about, how will I use the technology? What's the application of it? Who can it help? And so in that regard, it's important for the speakers to talk about the context in which that technology is being used, the application of it, not just digging into React because React is cool, right? And the last part of it is when they're sitting in that audience, it's really easy for new developers to just be overwhelmed with all the information. There's so much tech jargon and buzzwords that we use all the time that we kind of take for granted. And so what we do is I personally coach each and every one of our speakers, and we together design a cheat sheet. So that cheat sheet has information about the talk, the abstract, title, bio, but it also has a list of resources that they can look up afterwards to learn more about the topic. And it has a list of terms and definitions. So if I'm sitting in that talk that talks about, how I started a community garden, and I happen to use the word, the term API, right? Which for us might be totally normal. For that new developer, maybe like, wait, what does that stand for? You can look at that cheat sheet and see that word API, that term, and then the definition for it. So always making sure that there's never a point that people feel lost, whether it's lost physically or lost, emotionally, or lost, in terms of their learning and then being able to keep up with the conference and the talks.
Wow, super amazing. I love the idea of working with the speaker on that. And I imagine that the speaker ends up giving a better talk because they're kind of forced to think about their audience and what their audience doesn't know. And it's so easy in a conference to jump to assumptions. A lot of times you have an expert who really knows the subject matter, but maybe doesn't know as much about how to explain that subject matter to people who don't know it so well already, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and there's two things that we do to kind of make sure that that doesn't happen. Number one is the CFP itself. So the call proposal, ours is very different. We don't do the usual details and abstract. I personally just don't like that format. I don't think it's very helpful to the reviewer or the person who's submitting. I feel like it's great for speakers who know how to write that, right? It's like if you know what an abstract should look like, you'll do great. But it's not great for first-time speakers and people who don't do it, semi-professionally. So what we do is we ask you point blank, what is the story of this talk? What are the talking points? What is your intention? What is the research you plan to incorporate? Why are you the right person to give this talk? And that's not really about expertise. It's about, what is the match between your topic and you as a, as a person, as a technologist. So we try and get at the heart of what the talk is going to be. And I think it does two things. It helps us really review it and have enough information to know what it should look like. But it also, I think, helps the speaker because that submitter can really think about and reflect, what is my intention? How do I want attendees to feel? What is the research I'm going to use? Is it going to be mostly anecdotal? Am I going to incorporate data and reports? It really gives them an opportunity to kind of think a little bit more deeply and be more purposeful with their entry.
Right. And then that is helpful to the speaker who will probably actually feel more comfortable and more prepared giving their talk. Mm-hmm. And speakers oftentimes, they're nervous. They're working at the last minute, putting things together. And I feel like a lot of the nervousness that comes from a speaker has to do with their own lack of certainty about who's going to be in the audience and what their expectations are. And when you're trying to make a presentation for a mysterious audience, you're always going to have a hard time feeling confident about it because you don't know who's in the room. So the more that you can help them understand that, the better.
Yep.
And that's terrific. So super cool on that. What about connections between the attendees? How do you facilitate community and connectedness kind of between the folks who show up?
Yeah, good question. I think that for us, it's frankly a little bit easier because our folks really want to meet each other. A big part of why they come to the conference isn't just for the good food and the talks, it's to meet other people who are like them. So they are just, frankly, they're very chatty, they're very social, they're really easy to engage. But we also we also have an MC. So our MC is Nikhil Paul. He's amazing. He's a developer slash Bollywood instructor. So he goes in, with some amazing Bollywood music and dance moves. He gets people dancing, he gets people moving. We have a dance break right in the middle of the conference. So really trying to create, through the program, trying to create these opportunities for people to engage and just get active. And frankly, when you're in a big room doing Bollywood dancing with your neighbor, like you have something to talk about. So that's really helpful. Yeah.
I'm finding an amazing thread through a lot of the research that we're doing in this conference around movement, music, singing, dancing, just these very fundamental, tribal, personal, human things. Mm-hmm. And it seems like in so many cases, people are just so out of touch with their bodies. They're so out of touch with that expressive side of themselves. Yep. And that generally when people do incorporate those things in, if we can kind of break the ice and people are willing to give it a try a little bit, people seem to be totally excited and energized by those kinds of things.
Yeah, they just need a little push. That's really all it is. They just need someone to say, hey, put your arm right here, and then they'll do it. And it's great.
Super cool. And so zoom me out a little bit. Where does this conference happen? How many people come?
Sure. So it happens in New York City. In the past 2 years, it's been taking place at Microsoft, about 300 attendees. This year, we're going a little bit bigger. We're going to be actually at NYU Skirball, which is their big theater at NYU, and we're going to have about 700 people this year. So July 22nd, yeah.
Long time home to the New York Tech Meetup where we first connected.
Yep.
Skirball Center is an amazing space. Congrats on that.
Thank you. I was so excited to be back there. It's beautiful.
Going to be great to have those pictures for the website.
Yep, exactly. You got it.
And so where are you going from here? What is on your mind? What are you focused on going forward with your community? Yeah,
good question. So one of the things I really want to do is make sure that this is sustainable. That's one thing that's always been really important to me ever since I decided, okay, this is going to be a business. I don't want to be one of those community organizers who's just totally burnt out. That's my biggest fear. I don't want to be spreading myself so thin that I end up not being able to serve the community at all. And so right now, frankly, we're hiring. We're hiring a community and social media manager. And I'm also hiring a producer for the shows and hopefully going to do a couple more podcasts. So my big goal is to be able to take, a lot of the stuff that I've been doing on my own and to get some more help and get some people to kind of take ownership of the very clear parts of the business. And then I can focus more on the long-term vision and frankly, getting a little bit more sleep and that whole thing. So yeah.
Gotcha. And what's your experience been like so far in the hiring process? Where are you at? Are you just getting started or are you deep into it now?
Yeah. So at this point, at the time of this recording, we have I posted a job, I think like 2 weeks ago. I think within 4 days, we had over 100 applications, which is like way more than I expected. I thought we'd get like maybe 5. And then I interviewed about 12 folks. And then now we're down to basically like the last 3. And so we're hopefully by the time this goes out, we'll have someone for our community social media position already started. And then we're about to post for our producer position. So that one's
great. Very cool. And in terms of the long term, the big picture, you're going to plan to continue to run the conference. You're going to plan to continue to run your podcasts and the online discussions. Any other kind of major directions that you're looking to go?
Yeah, the main thing is the podcasting, the media stuff. Like that one's really big for us because frankly, we do it really well. Like we're really good at producing. I have an editor who does an amazing job of cutting all the shows. And so I think that there's still a lot of room for growth in that medium and being able to produce, better shows and more diverse content for our community. That's going to be a big part of the rest of the year for us.
So let's step out of this a little bit and talk about the bigger picture. What kind of stories are you hearing from the people who participate in the various programs that you run? And give me a sense of kind of your thoughts on belonging and loneliness and kind of what's going on in the world and how that relates to what you're doing.
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of folks are realizing slowly that they don't have to do it alone. And hopefully we're a part of that journey of realizing that you really don't have to be isolated. And I think a lot of people begin this and they're scared. They're scared, they're intimidated, they're overwhelmed. There are tons of great resources out there, but how do you pick them? How do you pick which one to start? How do you know when you're done? How do you know when it's ready to apply for a job? So there's so many unknowns and so many moments where you just feel really lonely in your decision. And I think what makes learning how to code so different is that it's not very relatable. It's not something that your spouse can really appreciate if they're not also in tech. It's not something your parents probably understand very well because they're like, what is this coding thing? Your friends probably don't really know what you're doing and why you left your job to learn this whole new skill. It's like this strange little isolating problem that the people in your life probably don't really appreciate and don't understand. And then they're also like, if you're on your computer all day, like, why are you frustrated with it? It feels like it looks easy from the outside when we think about the apps that we use. Oh, we just push a button, but it takes so much to be able to have a button to push. And you don't really know that, until you're in it. So there's a lot of moments, a lot of reasons to feel really lonely. And so our big thing is to remove that isolation, to make you understand, to help you understand that there is a whole community out here who's rooting for you, who's cheering you on, and who really wants the best for you. So I like to think we're a part of that journey, but there are lots of other folks who are, in that as well. And one thing that I'm really happy to see, especially in the last couple of years, is I think the tech community has been, is notorious for being not very nice and being kind of mean to people. And I feel like there's a huge revolt against that now. And now everyone is very determined to be very, very nice. And it's great. It's wonderful. And I've seen a lot of, communities and just individual contributors who are very, who've been through that experience of feeling put down or left behind or just, not wanted. And they're being extra welcoming and extra nurturing to the folks coming up behind them. So it's been great. I think we're doing well. We're on the right path.
I really appreciate that. And I feel like there is this common thread that you're touching on that I see in a lot of other contexts, which is people who feel like they're alone dealing with a thing and finding that they're not, and finding that there's a way to connect with other people. And that could be, dealing with addiction, dealing with a loss, dealing with trying to learn a new skill like what you're describing, or I come from the co-working world, so people who work from home, working alone, that kind of thing. But I think it's extra super the case in tech and in coding because it's just so complex and there's so much going on. Even like I have a CS degree and I'm intimidated to try to keep up with all the stuff that's going on and try to get caught up with something. I feel like the documentation is just all over the place and it can be very hard to find a start.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, I was never a particularly good CS student, but it's a lot. But the fact that we can all be in this together, I think, is important, especially when it's hard to explain because it's so abstract. If I'm learning how to build stuff like a construction company, I can say, look, I learned how to build a house. There's the house. It's right there. When you build a computer program, it's like, well, I got this thing to compile, and it's hard to explain.
What does that mean to anyone?
Yeah, it all happened on a screen. I mean, it's hard for someone, even if you show it to them, a lot of times the magic is all something that ends up looking very simple on the front end.
Yeah. That's when it's good. It's when it looks simple, right?
And then it's like, well, what's the big deal? And like, no, you don't realize it's a really big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
So, so I get that. And then what ends up happening? Like, what do people tell you? What do people end up doing? Do people end up self-organizing things as a result of connecting through your community?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've seen people put together their own little meetups. We've had a couple of folks do their own podcasts, from listening to the show. We've had folks teach courses. We've had folks do workshops and teach their own online courses. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're free. We've had mostly folks mentor other people, and we've had people get jobs. That's probably my favorite. That's the ultimate success story, is when someone says, oh yeah, I connected with someone on Twitter and that led to a job, or someone who emails me and says, hey, I went to CodeLand and met up with a recruiter there, one of our sponsors there, and then they got a job that way. Those are like amazing stories to hear. So yeah, folks really, that's one thing I love about this community, is they're really good at taking advantage of what's in front of them. So if you give them a good resource, they'll use it, they'll read it, they'll apply it, and they'll carry it through.
have you, how do you manage the self-organized nature of it? You mentioned people doing meetup groups, people doing workshops. To what extent do you work with trying to control that versus letting people do whatever they want? What's the balancing act there for you?
Yeah, I don't try and control it. That's the answer. Especially for, I mean, so, people don't generally use our branding. So it's a lot of, I think one is called like Newbies in Pittsburgh, I think is one that spawned up like shortly after we started to do a lot of big stuff. And that's totally awesome. Like, it's really great when people do their own thing. So what we do is we try and support it. So we try and retweet it. We'll include it in our newsletter. I've had a bunch of folks reach out to me personally and say, hey, I'm about to start my own community, not even in the US, like all over the world. Can you give me some pointers? Can you give me some tips? And I've gotten on the phone with them or gotten on Skype with them and shared, things that have worked, things that haven't worked. So really my job is just to support and make sure that, they don't repeat the same mistakes I've made, because I've made a lot of mistakes, and figuring out, how to best support them. But we don't generally try to control anything. Yeah.
So if you were, if someone is a part of your community, they want to start a local group around maybe the theme of what you're doing, but they're not going to use your branding. But maybe I would want to start like Newbies Chicago or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give somebody like that? Maybe there's somebody watching now who's going to be inspired to do this.
Yeah. I would say it's hard. It's really, really hard. Like starting a meetup and having it be successful takes a lot of work. It's a lot of promotion. It's a lot of marketing. It's actually, I'd say it's mostly promotion. It's mostly marketing. And so just to anticipate that, it takes a while to get a meetup to build and to grow. So don't be discouraged if the first couple, there isn't a great turnout. It takes a long time for that to really develop and sustain itself. And also, like, it's a lot easier when you have food. If you're able to even just like have some pizza, something just really cheap, it just helps it. It's easier to say like, hey, well, you'll be fed and educated at this meetup instead of, just educated, especially if it's an evening thing. And I'd also say, think about different times for the meetups. A lot of folks can't do the evening because they're parents, they have, they got kids and they have to come home from work. So think about, different times of the day, weekends, mornings, afternoon, that are just, not your typical meetup days, and see if you can cater to different folks that way.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy poll to send once you've got a critical mass of members in your Facebook page or your meetup group or whatever. You say, what's your ideal meeting time, A, B, or C, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And food is something that I feel like, if you're getting started and you're on a budget, it's a pretty easy thing to get someone to donate.
That's true.
Whether the restaurant itself or the bar or whatever, or a third party. A lot of times there are local companies in your area that are more than happy to kick in $100 or $200 to buy some food.
Yep,
okay.
Absolutely.
Totally. Super cool. What else is on your mind? What else do you like to talk about?
I don't know. I feel like we covered like most of it, if not all of it. It's pretty much like all I do, is think about this kind of stuff. So I just did a massive brain dump on you, which hopefully was helpful to folks.
All right. So we're going, this is like the most efficient conversation we've had yet.
Okay.
Let's talk about a few bigger picture things around, I like to ask the guests that we're interviewing a few questions around resources, books, tips that they've learned.
Okay.
Is there any particular, I guess let's start with resources. Is there any particular like tool or app or gadget or anything that's been particularly helpful to you in your community building journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. My Google Calendar is everything. And that's the thing too, like you have to make time for your community. It's not just, there's a lot of preparation that goes into that, so for the Twitter chats, I have to make sure to make time to capture the chats. I have to make sure to make time to prepare for the questions. The podcast obviously takes like a ton of prep time and post-production as well. So like budgeting time for tasks, I think is a big part of being able to run any community well. So Google Calendar for sure. Also a big fan of Airtable, which is, if you don't know, it's a spreadsheet on steroids. It's the best way to kind of describe it. It's really, really good. It's been really helpful using it as like a calendar, an editorial calendar of sorts. Trello is another big one also that we use as a calendar, editorial calendar as well. And what else? Buffer is a big one for scheduling social media stuff. I try to limit how much we actually do scheduling, but that's been really helpful. Those are probably the big ones. Yeah.
Big plus one for Airtable and the filtering and sorting powers that it has, and being able to create essentially a relational database without just visually in
Yeah.
that way is so powerful. So
It's
big
great,
plus
yeah.
on that. I'm realizing now we could actually have a whole other entire interview just about your tips for someone who's watching this who might want to start a podcast.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Community.
Got a lot.
Do you have any like super quick, like 1 or 2 sentence tips if we have community builders watching who are thinking of starting a podcast?
Yeah, invest in good equipment. Like equipment is important, and it's not, I'm very particular about equipment. I mail all of our guests a mic, like a really professional grade mic, and I have them use like a little pillow setup to make sure to get rid of some of the reverb in the room.
You wrote an amazing post about this.
Yeah, I did write a post about this. Yeah, like a while back.
I loved it. Yes.
Yeah, we mailed them around. We've been doing it for the last 2 years. I have not lost a mic since. Haven't lost or broken a mic since we started. And so that's been really big. And the reason, I think that people miss the reason why I'm so particular about audio. It's not because I want it. It's not about it sounding the best. It's the opportunity to decrease the distance between the audience and the show. So when it sounds crackly and crappy and, it has a lot of, and you can hear the artifacts, you've created distance, right? It sounds like a phone call. And who do you call? People who are far away. If you can increase the audio quality and make it sound like we're all sitting in a room together, you've created a much stronger and a deeper emotional connection with your listeners. And that's what I want. I want them to feel less alone, right? I want them to feel engaged. I want them to feel like they're sitting at the table with me. They're just quiet, right? That's the illusion that I'm trying to create. And so to do that, you have to have good equipment. You have to have at least decent equipment, and you have to invest in your software so you can get that pure, clean audio, not for the sake of wanting clear audio, but for the sake of creating that connection with your audience. That's really what it's about.
Wow, it's incredibly poetic, and I feel like I appreciate and understand it a lot better now, having heard you frame it that way. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
What's the mic you mail to people?
It is the Shure 87A. It's a really, I'm just wondering if I had it around me, but I don't have it around me. But it's a really nice mic. It's pretty relatively pricey. To get it, I actually tested. I did over 140, maybe 150 different audio tests with 9 different mics. And I had a spreadsheet, and I looked at, and I listened to just so much of my own voice in that week that I did this. And I listened to what the mic sounds like in different settings, different parts of the room, with different things around me, and finally came up with the mic that I thought did a great job. And that was also like small and compact enough that I could mail it out to folks. And that was the mic.
I feel like it could be a really valuable community tool for an organizer who is interested in connecting with people in a particular field to say, hey, let's record a conversation, and we're building connection right now, just having this conversation, and then other people get to connect to us when they watch it. So that's pretty neat.
Absolutely.
All right, a book recommendation, maybe one that is not so obvious, not one that everyone's already heard about. We've heard a lot of people recommend Priya Parker's book, for example. What other, do you have a favorite book that's been useful to you in your community building journey?
Yeah, so I'll do 2. I think one of them is probably really popular already. Deep Work is one I recently just finished by Cal Newport. That one has been really great. It's made me realize that I do not use my time efficiently at all. And it's made me want to just like rejig my whole calendar and, really make time for active and for a very intentional work, for that deep work. So that's something I've just kind of realized and I'm working on now. But another book that I really like by Adam Grant is Give and Take. And that I feel like is the essence of community building. So the book is basically about givers and takers and matchers, and how in the world you're either one of those 3. You're either the person who gives without keeping score. You're the taker, so you take, and you don't give back. Or you're a matcher, where you give, but you also kind of expect something in return. Most people are matchers. Most people in the world are matchers. And it talks about how givers ultimately win. They ultimately win in the long run. They fail in the short term. In the short term, they end up giving so much they don't have anything. But in the long term, they end up kind of beating everyone in terms of success and wealth and happiness and all that stuff. And it's just a fascinating book that talks about why that is, how that works, how you can be a giver without kind of burning out, because that's always, always an option as well. And it's a beautifully written and researched book that just really gets at the heart of, I think, what community builders are all about, because we're all givers, whether or not we like to admit it, we're givers. We just love giving things away. So, yeah.
I feel like I probably have yet to meet a community builder who is a pure taker.
Right? That'd be a small community.
Yeah. Wow, awesome. That's going straight on my queue for sure.
It's really good.
So great. So thank you for this. One last question.
Sure.
This is just you talking to the folks watching.
Yeah.
A message of encouragement to the gatherers of the world who are tuned in.
Yeah, I would say a message of encouragement is that it's hard. Like community building is really hard. On the outside, it feels like it's warm and fuzzy and full of happiness, but you are allowed to be frustrated. You're allowed to be kind of fed up at times. You're allowed to feel lonely. It's you're taking on a lot of emotional labor by doing this job, and that's totally fine. Like that's what community building is. A lot of community building is done in the dark. It's invisible work. It's stuff that no one will ever see. No one sees the DMs that I send to people trying to, encourage them, give them advice. No one hears the phone calls I have with strangers all over the world of, helping them with their communities. No one sees, the conference booklets that I lug, to the airport, trying to get them to the conference. Like no one knows about any of those things, but that's where the real work happens. So if it feels a little lonely, if it feels a little hard, if it feels frustrating at times, that's totally normal. That's just part of the job.
Yes, indeed. And hopefully the fulfillment that we get from the lives that we make better more than makes up for it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Saron, it's been such a pleasure. Congrats. Keep up the amazing work. And I'm excited to continue following your journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much.